The nursery paint samples were still taped to the hallway wall when Claire Whitfield came home early, her coat still buttoned, her keys still in her hand. She'd meant to surprise Daniel. Instead, she stood in the front hall and heard his voice coming from the study, low and easy in a way it hadn't been in months, not since she told her lawyer to draft the papers. "She still thinks this is about the house," Daniel was saying, and then he laughed, a short, satisfied sound she hadn't heard directed at her in years. "She has no idea what's actually coming." Claire didn't move. She stood in her own front hall, coat buttoned to the collar, and understood, in the flat, unhurried way you understand a diagnosis before the doctor finishes the sentence, that the man on the other side of that door was not entirely the man she'd married. She didn't go in. She hung up her coat, poured a glass of water she didn't drink, and went to bed early, and for 3 weeks after that she did something that surprised even her. Nothing. She didn't confront him. She didn't call her lawyer to move the filing date up. She went back to being exactly the wife Daniel expected. She asked about his day. She laughed at the right moments. She let him kiss her goodnight because some part of her hadn't caught up yet to the part that had already started keeping a mental ledger. She wasn't heartbroken, she was paying attention. The first thing she noticed once she started looking was the storage unit. Daniel had rented it 8 months earlier, telling her it was overflow for his late father's tools, and furniture, sentimental clutter neither of them had the heart to sort through yet. She'd believed him easily. Grief makes reasonable people bad auditors. But she noticed now that he paid the unit in cash, that he went alone on Saturday mornings he used to spend with her, and that he'd started taking calls out on the back porch with the sliding door shut, even in the cold. None of it was proof. She told herself that, standing at the kitchen window watching him pace the yard with the phone against his ear. Lots of people take calls outside. Lots of people keep an old storage unit. She rationalized it into the shape of nothing, the way people do when the alternative is a shape they aren't ready to hold. It was her brother-in-law who cracked the door open, without meaning to. Tamaz had never been as good at keeping his brother's secrets as Daniel assumed he was. He called Claire on a Wednesday night, his voice pitched with the particular nervousness of a man who knows he shouldn't be making the call at all. "I probably shouldn't say anything," he said, "but I can't stop thinking about it." "Say what, Tamaz?" A long pause. "Daniel's been talking to someone, a woman named Priya, a lot like texting at midnight a lot." Claire kept her voice level, the same voice she used with difficult clients at the firm. "Priya who?" "I don't know her last name. I only know because his laptop was open at Mom's on Sunday and I saw the thread before I could look away. It wasn't just messages, Claire, there were spreadsheets, account numbers. I saw your name on one of the file titles and I panicked and closed it, but I haven't slept right since." "What kind of spreadsheets?" "I don't know, I only saw it for a few seconds. But Claire," his voice dropped, like he was checking over his shoulder even though he was 2 states away, "I don't think this is just him seeing someone. I think there's an actual plan." She thanked him. She told him he'd done the right thing. She hung up before he could hear whatever was happening in her voice, because for the first time since the front hall, something other than calculation had risen in her, and she needed a minute before she trusted herself to speak again. The name Priya meant nothing to Claire for 2 more days. Then it meant everything. Claire had spent 11 years as a forensic accountant, doing the kind of work most people found unglamorous, tracing where a company's money actually went, and why, when the official story didn't add up. It made her good at exactly one thing outside the office, knowing how to find a paper trail someone had tried to bury. She started with the joint accounts, which told her nothing new. Then she pulled the statements from Daniel's freelance consulting account, the one he managed alone, the one she'd never once had reason to check because she trusted him. Trust, she was learning, was mostly just the absence of looking. $14,000 had moved out over 5 months, in amounts small enough to look unremarkable individually, always to the same destination, an account under the name P. Sandhu. She sat with that longer than she wanted to admit. Then she called the one person she trusted enough to bring into this before she understood what this even was. Renee Okafor had been Claire's divorce attorney for exactly 9 days, retained quietly before any of this started, back when Claire still believed the divorce would be the hard part. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, the way good lawyers do, and when Claire finally stopped talking, Renee turned the printed statement over in her hands like it might tell her something the numbers hadn't. You want my honest read. That's the only kind I want. This isn't an affair budget. Affairs are sloppy dinners, hotels, gifts with bad timing. This is structured. Same recipient, same rough interval, same rough amount. She tapped the page. This looks like someone's paying for a service, not a person. Funding what? Renee looked up, her composed courtroom face slipping into something closer to concern. That's what we find out before you file. Because right now, Claire, you're about to walk into a divorce with no idea what you're actually walking into. The false normalcy held 2 more weeks, and Claire performed it flawlessly. She let Daniel take her to their anniversary dinner, 13 years, a number that used to mean something, and watched him smile across the candlelight with an ease that, months earlier, she would have called love and now recognized as rehearsal. The detail she'd been explaining away finally refused explanation on a Sunday morning, when Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter while he was in the shower, and a name lit up the screen before she could look away. Priya Sandhu. Not P. Sandhu from a bank statement. A full name attached to a photo, a woman in her early 40s, sharp-suited, standing in front of a courthouse with the easy posture of someone who'd stood in front of a lot of them. Claire set the phone back down exactly where it had been, walked out to the garden, and stood there for what she later realized was almost 10 minutes before she could make her hands stop shaking long enough to call Renee. I have a name, she said, and a face. Renee moved fast once she had a name. Within 4 days she'd confirmed what Claire already suspected and uncovered something worse. Priya Sandhu wasn't just a woman Daniel had been seeing. She was a financial consultant whose public filings described her specialty, in careful corporate language, as pre-litigation asset positioning, a business that depended entirely on marriages ending badly, and who apparently didn't mind getting personally involved in the ones she profited from. She's done this before, Renee said, sliding a folder across a coffee shop table 2 towns from either of their offices. Different alias 4 years ago, different state. Husband had the business, wife had the equity. Priya got close to the husband, helped him quietly reposition assets before filing, took a fee once the settlement closed. There's at least one more case with the same shape. Never enough to prosecute, enough to see the pattern. Claire stared at the folder without opening it, so none of this was ever really about him and her. I don't think love's in her business model, Renee said. I think you were the target from the start, not his heart, your equity. The words hit harder than the affair itself had. Claire had braced for the ordinary kind of betrayal, a marriage gone cold, a husband who'd fallen for someone else. This was colder, not a failure of love, a calculation. She'd spent months being, without knowing it, a line item in someone else's business plan. How much is she going after? Renee opened the folder herself and turned it around. Spreadsheets, projections, an itemized breakdown of Claire's practice, the client list she'd spent a decade building, the partnership stake, the retirement accounts assembled by someone who clearly understood exactly what they were worth. At the bottom of one page, a note that hadn't been meant for anyone but Daniel. Once the transfer clears, we split it 60-40. Her name comes off everything. Claire read it twice, and set it down with the same steady hand she used on client audits worth far more than this scheme. There's a transfer document, Renee said quietly. Draft in a filing I'm not going to explain how I got. It restructures your partnership stake into a trust, effective the week before you were planning to file. Your name comes off as controlling partner, his goes on as sole beneficiary. He doesn't have the authority to do that. He doesn't, but you signed a power of attorney for him 3 years ago during your mother's estate settlement. You never revoked it. Claire closed her eyes. She remembered signing it a Tuesday, her mother 2 days in the ground, Daniel's hand steady on her shoulder while she initialed pages she barely read, because she trusted the man holding the pen more than she trusted her own grief. She had handed him, without knowing it, the exact key he would eventually use to try to take the one thing that had always been entirely hers. He was never going to leave with half, Claire said slowly. He was going to leave with the practice, and I was going to find out after it was already gone. Claire didn't sleep that night, but not from fear. She lay in the dark beside a man she now understood as clearly as an audit trail, and something in her went quiet in a way that felt less like collapse and more like arrival. By morning she'd stopped asking what he'd done to her. She'd started asking what she was going to do about it. I'm not confronting him, she told Renee the next day. Confrontation gives them time to move the money. I want to know exactly when they plan to execute, and I want to be 3 steps ahead before either of them knows I've moved at all. That's not how most people handle this, Renee said, and Claire could hear something like respect under the caution. Most people aren't trying to win, they're trying to feel better. Claire started the car. I don't need to feel better. I need Priya Sandhu to never see a cent of a practice it took me 11 years to build, and I need Daniel to understand exactly what he decided to underestimate. Over the next 10 days, Claire and Renee built a plan with almost nothing to do with anger and everything to do with precision. First, Renee filed a quiet revocation of the old power of attorney, backdated to the earliest legally defensible date. Second, Claire moved her partnership stake into a new holding structure, effective a full week before the planned transfer date. None of it required Daniel to know anything had changed. That was the point. Third, and this was the part that made Renee go quiet with something like admiration, Claire reached out to a name buried 3 pages deep in Priya's old filings. A former client named Marcus Feld, whose divorce Priya had consulted on under a different name 2 years earlier, and whose settlement had shrunk by nearly a third between mediation and signing. Marcus answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting years for someone to ask. "You want to know about Priya," he said before Claire had finished introducing herself. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that. I think she's doing to me what she did to you." Long silence, then a short, humorless laugh. "She never touches the money herself, that's the thing people don't understand. She finds someone already inside the marriage, usually the spouse who feels overlooked, who's ready to believe someone finally sees them, and she lets them do the actual moving. She just advises, structures, takes her cut when it clears." His voice hardened. "By the time I understood what happened, the paperwork was final and my lawyer said there was nothing left to do. She never signs anything herself." "But you kept records." "I kept everything. I just never had anyone to hand it to who'd know what to do with it." "I might be exactly that person," Claire said. Marcus's records, combined with what Renee had already built, gave Claire something she hadn't expected to need: leverage that had nothing to do with her own marriage. Priya Sandhu wasn't running a scheme against one husband. She was running a business quietly across at least 2 states, and every prior client had made decisions under advice that, examined together, looked less like consulting and more like a documented pattern of financial fraud. Would Daniel be protected? Claire asked, and the question surprised her even as she said it. Not because she still loved him, she understood by then that whatever version of him she'd loved had probably never fully existed, but because some stubborn part of her didn't want to see him destroyed. She wanted him exposed. Those weren't the same thing. "Depends entirely on what he knew and when," Renee said. "If he believed he was simply divorcing you and Priya happened to be advising him, he's a man who made a bad choice in people. If he knowingly used a power of attorney he knew had been given in grief, not consent. To structure fraud against you specifically, that's not a bad choice. That's a plan." Claire arranged a dinner. The anniversary restaurant, the same table, on a Thursday 2 weeks later, the exact week. Renee confirmed through channels Claire chose not to ask about, that Daniel and Priya had scheduled to finalize the transfer. Daniel arrived in the tie she'd bought him for their 10th anniversary, and for a moment, sitting across from him in candlelight, Claire felt the strange vertigo of loving a memory that no longer had a person attached to it. "You've seemed different lately," he said, halfway through the appetizer, studying her the way he used to when he was trying to read her mood. "Calmer." "I've had some clarity," Claire said. "About us?" "About a lot of things." She set down her fork. "I know about Priya, Daniel." His face did something complicated, panic, smoothed over fast by a practiced calm that told Claire, more than any document could have, exactly how long he'd been rehearsing this conversation from the other side. "Claire, I can explain. I know about the transfer document. I know about the power of attorney you were planning to use before it expired 3 weeks ago, quietly, without your knowledge." She kept her voice level, almost gentle. "I know about Marcus Feld, and I have a fairly strong suspicion there's at least one more before him." Daniel's hand went still on his glass. "You've been investigating me." "I've been protecting what's mine," Claire said, "which turns out to have been the correct instinct since you and Priya were about 2 weeks from taking all of it." "It isn't," he stopped himself, and in that pause Claire watched him make a decision she'd half expected and still found breathtaking in its coldness. He stopped defending himself and started, instead, protecting the plan. "You don't understand how this works. Priya knows people, lawyers, arbitrators. if you try to fight this. I'm not going to fight it, Daniel. She allowed herself a small, unhurried smile. I already won it, 3 weeks ago. You've spent the last month planning to take a stake in a practice that no longer legally exists in the form you think it does. The colour left his face in a way that told her everything the paperwork hadn't needed to confirm. And Priya, Claire continued, should probably check her phone in the next hour, because a man named Marcus Feld has spent 2 weeks compiling a file with 2 other people who used to trust her, and it's currently sitting with an attorney who specializes in exactly this kind of fraud. Daniel's composure finally cracked, not into tears, but into something colder and more honest. Anger, unguarded, the anger of a man watching a months-long plan collapse in real time. You had no right. I had every right, Claire said quietly. You made sure of that the day you decided my career was worth restructuring behind my back. The weeks that followed unfolded with the particular quiet of a demolition handled by professionals. No shouting, no wreckage visible from the street, just supports removed one at a time until the whole structure came down on schedule. Marcus Feld's file, combined with the case Renee had documented, went to an attorney who specialized in financial fraud and had been waiting years for a case with enough corroborating evidence to actually hold. Priya Sandhu's consulting business, along with the 2 shell entities she used to route her fees, came under formal investigation within a month. Daniel was never charged with anything. Renee made sure of that, not out of mercy but out of precision. The power of attorney had expired before he could act on it, which meant no fraud had actually been completed, only planned, and planning, however damning, isn't the same as a case a prosecutor wants to spend a year proving. Instead, Daniel lost something worse for a man like him. He lost the story he'd told about himself. The divorce took 10 weeks from filing to signature, fast, clean, almost anticlimactic, because there was nothing left to fight over. Claire's practice was untouchable. The condo, purchased before the marriage, stayed hers. Daniel walked away with exactly what the law entitled him to and not $1 more, and signed the final papers without looking at her, in a conference room 3 floors above a city he'd once told his brother she'd never see coming. Tamaz called her the week after it was finalized. I feel like I should apologize for something, he said. I don't even know what. You don't owe me anything, Claire told him. You gave me the truth, that's rarer than people think. Are you okay? Claire looked out at the office that still bore her name, the client list still hers, the practice she'd built still fundamentally her own. I think I'm better than okay, she said. I finally understand exactly what I'm worth. Turns out it was never a number Daniel or Priya had the right to set. On a Sunday morning 6 months later, Claire stood in the kitchen of the condo, alone, coffee in hand. The storage unit finally cleared out and closed for good. Sunlight came through the window over the sink the way it always had, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it, and for the first time in over a year, the quiet in her home belonged entirely to her. If you made it this far, you already know this was never really about the divorce or even the betrayal. It was about the moment someone decides to stop reacting and start building. If Claire's patience earned your respect, let me know with a like and tell me below. At what point did you know Daniel had already lost? I read every comment. And if you want to see what happens the next time someone underestimates the wrong person, subscribe. This won't be the last one.